Hello and welcome to Raider HQ After Dark. I'm your host, Raider. And in this video, what I'm going to be talking about is Pes Planus, otherwise known as flat feet. But before I get into it, what I'd like to do is take the time to thank all the members, all the subscribers, everyone that's watching that isn't a member or subscriber, because the channel has been doing exceptionally well thanks to all of you guys. Now, I will humbly request that if you are watching the video and you are not subscribed, please subscribe. And if you want to, throw a like in there too. Now, you don't have to be a member if you don't want to. It's not required. I don't hide anything behind any kind of monetary paywall. So if it's something you're kind of interested in and you find some value out of these videos, please just subscribe if you want to. Now, getting back to the video. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about Pes Planus, otherwise known as flat feet. And what we're going to be discussing is we're going to take an initial kind of general overview of the foot, kind of talk about how constricted it is and how it has its own set of unique rules and regulations associated with it. Then, once we get done with that, we're going to be talking about Pes Planus exclusively. You know, what's the general rule is it can be separately granted, but what does it have to be combined with? Because there are certain rules in the M21 that say that if you have both Pes Planus and this other condition service connected, they can't be separately granted. So I want to kind of make you aware of that so that way you guys can be informed, because sometimes it's not valuable to claim certain things because there will be no value added to it if it's combined with another condition. Like if you have Pes Planus is one of the few conditions that can get up to like 50% service connected. So if you combine something else with it, like Metatarsalgia, for example, it doesn't provide any value to claiming that. So it's just, one of those strategies where sometimes it's not poking the bear, but it's just kind of a useless claim because it doesn't contribute to anything. And then we're going to go through the 38 CFR Part 4, and we're going to talk and review exclusively how each percentage is given for, Pes Planus. And then finally, we're going to round it off with going over the foot DBQ. Now, there's two reasons for me to want to do that. Number one, to show you how, it's rated, what check boxes need to be checked, etc. And that's valuable for you if you go to a VSO and you kind of, like, let's say you get granted for Pes Planus, you want to review and see whether or not you got an accurate rating. Well, going through the DBQ will help us do that. Now, the second reason for doing that is because let's say you're doing a private DBQ, you get it done, you get the private DBQ handed to you, and you kind of want to, I don't know, cheat and go to the last page of the book and see how it ends. You want to see where you should be granted at, then, we'll kind of go over that too. So anyway, so let me go ahead and share my screen. We're doing pretty good, guys. I've gotten through this with limited barking. So we want to start off with 531B5C. Now this talks about, this is kind of a manual reference to help the raters get into the kind of the mentality of how to rate the foot. Now, we start off with discussing 38 CFR 4.14. Now, if you're not familiar with that, that's the pyramiding rule, which kind of says, and it kind of explains it right here, that requires that the evaluation of the same disability and or same manifestation, we're going to say symptom here. So the same disability or the same symptom cannot be separately granted is what the pyramiding rule says. Now, if you have migraines versus headaches, those aren't the same symptoms. Those are different disabilities. So, but if you had, like, let's say migraines, we can't use migraines for, separately granting migraines and then using migraines for, say, fibromyalgia or something like that. You can't use the same symptom and or disability twice to get an additional benefit. So we're starting out with 38 CFR 4.14 is because the compact nature of the foot makes it to where the rater has to be on top of it. They've got to be on their toes pun intended, to make sure that they're not overlapping symptoms on top of each other. And this can be quite challenging. A lot of raters have a special disdain for the foot because they can have circumstances where they erroneously grant things that they shouldn't have because it is explicitly stated in the manual that they can't do it, and they didn't catch it. So you'll find this with newer raters a lot more times. Every single time I rate the foot, I've got to come to this section. It's too hard to memorize and it changes too often. So good raters will always go to the section of the manual that they're working on, and they will actually review in real time as they're kind of, evaluating it to make sure that there aren't any changes that have happened since the last time that they've rated the foot. It's just a good practice to get into if you're a rater. And I do know that there are a few raters that watch the channel. So, okay. So we talk about the anatomical structure and the interrelated physiological functioning may make it difficult to differentiate the etiology or cause of certain disability symptoms. So, this is important right here because you can say that you have pain in the foot, but we might not know what the cause of the pain is. And what can happen is when we have multiple service connected foot disabilities, figuring out the cause can be hard. So, what you'll oftentimes see is you will oftentimes see uh, that if you've claimed multiple foot conditions, you might have a lot of back and forth to where, and I'm horrible with the steps, guys, but you'll see where the step goes back to like we're reviewing things. It gets in the rater's hands and then it goes back to development because we oftentimes have to solicit for the cause of the certain symptom. So that way we can have the medical provider provide a medical determination that, oh no, these two conditions are not the same. They have different causes. This pain right here is due to the heel, and this pain right here is due to the forefoot. So, they don't overlap. But and this is what's going to tell the rater. Sometimes when we do that defer back to clarify the contention with the examiner, it's a necessary step. I just want to say that up front. It might seem like, oh, well, they should just figure it out. Well, they can't, because that's the domain of the medical provider to tell the legal side of the fence how to interpret it. So, um, this is important. You kind of want them to do this because there's a lot of ambiguity in the foot to where if if the rater wants to be safe, sometimes they'll combine things together because they can't tell if there's a separate etiology. Now, if the etiology of the symptoms can be delineated, separate disability evaluations may be assigned. This is once again not up to the rater. The rater cannot dictate etiology. So, if you happen to, as the veteran, go into your CMP examination, and let's say that you accidentally say, no, 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 this pain is due to this thing, or this pain, is the same as my pain from this, that's not going to hurt you. We can't use those words against you because you're not a medical provider. We should still, as part of the duty to assist, the rater should still defer back and actually get the etiology of the specific symptoms separate. Now, in instances where flat feet, because that's what we're talking about today, in instances where the manual explicitly states that flat feet cannot be separately granted with this other condition, we don't need to do that etiology review, because if you claim flat feet and you claim the other conditions, let's say another condition that can't be separately evaluated, then the end result will be them being combined together. So this would be overdevelopment for the rater to go back and defer back for determining the etiology if the end product is always going to be that they have to be combined together. Whew, okay. So we're done with the first part of this. Let's move on to the specifics of flat feet. So, even though this is plantar fasciitis, And this part of the manual annoys me because flat feet is embedded in here. So Pes Planus, also known as flat feet, they can't be typically be rated separately. Hold on, I got to read it though. When service connection is established for Pes Planus and plantar fasciitis, evaluate the symptoms of both conditions together under the DC warranting the highest evaluation for the combined impairment. So what this means is the rule, the the upfront rule is to, if you have Pes Planus and plantar fasciitis granted, they have to be combined together. That is the basic rule. Let's look at the bullet points here. Pes Planus is characterized by pain and use of the feet or other foot pain, as included a higher evaluation. Sure. Okay. Evaluation of criteria for Pes Planus and plantar fascia are similar enough that providing separate evaluations will compensate for the same disability. So it'd be pyramiding, they're same or similar, right? So all of this tells the rater they should be combined together. Now, the next bullet point, however, like always, there's always some kind of exception. Let's say that both conditions resulted from an injury. Now, if both conditions resulted from an injury of the foot, you may potentially rate them under the other foot injury. Uh, so Pes Planus or plantar fasciitis might fall under 5284. So there is a possibility that if your foot was injured, and let me go here. So 5284. We're doing it live. So because you could get away with granting under foot injury if the cause of, like, let's say the plantar fasciitis was a foot injury. Now, their plantar fasciitis might be more beneficial to be rated under this. However, you've got this very obscure moderately severe, or severe rating the two conditions could be granted for. And Pes Planus flat foot acquired, which is rated under 5276, can go up to 50%. So it's not advantageous to have flat foot granted under that 5284 for other foot injury. However, if we come up here to plantar fasciitis, well, you're not really losing out on much because it maxes out at 30%, similar to the foot injury. But you could get plantar fasciitis. Sorry, dogs are being loud. I had to cut that. So, basically, what I'm trying to say though is that the plantar fasciitis is the better fit for falling under that other foot disability because it maxes out at 30, and it's a way that if your plantar fasciitis was the result of an injury to the foot, an actual injury, um, you can get 30% without having surgical requirements or the bilateral factor. So there's just, the foot behaves in odd ways. This one right here, if it's more advantageous, you can actually get both of them combined under 5284 if you had like a circumstance in which, like, both were 0%. I don't understand why this is here, because the 5284 is not more advantageous. It's rarely more advantageous because, I mean, yes, we have to go by what the examiner says explicitly. Like, there's no criteria here for this. It's just moderate, moderately severe to severe. So you can technically get 30%. However, it's almost always been more beneficial to go with the the raw flat foot or Pes Planus. I mean, because yeah, it's just weird. But anyway, so that's about it for that. Let me come down here. I'm trying to find, okay, so this is one of the times in which you cannot, like, this is one of those undebatable situations. So do not assign separate evaluations for Pes Planus and Metatarsalgia. So this is another one, but it actually has a more firm stance on it. Metatarsalgia has to do with like pain in the toes type situation. Um, and then we talk about pyramiding more. Assign a single evaluation for Pes Planus with metatarsalgia using the predominant diagnostic code. Do not rate by analogy. Yeah, when there is an applicable DC. So and the reason why they don't, what they mean by this is they, the analogous codes is when we assign a primary code and then we'll assign like for this one it would be 5276 would be the primary code, and then 5299 would be the code for to say that, hey, look, we're rating this and now like we're trying to fit this condition that doesn't fit, it doesn't have its own diagnostic code, so we're trying to fit it with the closest level of symptoms that we can. So it's just reminding you, and I don't know why it's doing that, because you would pick, if you have Pes Planus, then you would pick Pes Planus, or you would pick Metatarsalgia. Both of them have their own diagnostic codes in here. So yeah, if, however, one of the both of these okay, so and then we talk about foot injuries, and I'm gonna be honest here. I've never in my entire time of rating had foot injury to where it was the more advantageous option, because foot injuries typically they say that they're minor in nature. So, and if you were to look at a minor foot injury here, it's 0%. So 0% is a foot injury. And I mean, like all day long, I will say that flat feet acquired should be what you lead with. And one of the reasons why, and I'm going to switch over to 38 CFR Part 4 now. One of the reasons why flat foot is one of the more beneficial diagnostic codes is because it doesn't violate the amputation rule. Now, not many of you have watched my amputation rule video, but you should, because artificially, each joint can only have a maximum, it can have a maximum amount that can be assigned to it and below. So for the feet, it's 40%, right? Well, flat feet violates that. So you can get a 50% rating in flat foot that doesn't violate the amputation rule, because the amputation rule says that any bilateral foot condition is excluded from the review to determine whether or not your leg conditions exceed the maximum value per joint. So yeah, go watch that video if you haven't. It's actually quite important. But let's go through flat feet real quick. So, if you are diagnosed with flat feet and you have mild symptoms that are relieved, they're mild, or symptoms are relieved by built in shoe or arch supports, you get a 0%. Painful motion should get you 10%. It's not listed in here, but painful motion itself, if you have pain upon locomotion with your feet, then you should be at the 10% value. So it is important, if you do have painful feet, to state that you have pain when walking or whatever it looks like for you. Pain on manipulation is not the same as painful motion. I need that to be clear. So that's not the same. So, in order to get 10% without painful motion, you need to have moderate symptoms, which I'm going to be honest with you, the mild, moderate, and severe scales are not used. So, they're typically not used for, and we'll see that in the foot DBQ. But most of the time, the symptoms themselves will actually dictate what percentage you get. So you need to have the box checked for weight bearing line over the medial to great toe. What does that mean? I don't know. I have no clue. This is up to the examiner to check this box. I have no, like, this is one of the situations where on this DBQ, the rater trusts whatever the examiner put in the box. Let's just be clear. we are not going to be questioning them. Oh, I don't think it is weight bearing over the line over the medial or to great toe. No, no rater is doing that. Whatever that box is that they checked is what you're going to get. So if it sometimes behooves you to take your DBQ into your podiatrist and say, do I have any of these things? If so, can you please just tell me what I have? So that way you're more informed. Inward bowing of the tendon Achilles. Once again, that box will be checked, and we will either check the same box in VBMSR or we won't. Pain on manipulation and use of feet. Now, this right here, this can be in, this is easier for us to discern that if there's pain on use of the feet, we can check that box through the veteran statements. We can potentially check this box. And then we have just a statement of it could be unilateral or bilateral. It doesn't matter, 10%. Then we go up here to severe, which is not something that we use typically. Objective evidence of marked deformity, pronation, abduction, etc. So this has to do with, I think, how the foot presents. So if the foot presents to where it is shaped funny, I think that's how that works. But once again, I'm going to absolute trust fall into this examiner's thing. I have no way to, there's going to be nothing in your medical records where I go, oh my gosh, they've got pronation of the foot. No, that ain't happening. Let's just be clear. There ain't no evidence other than in your CMP exam that's going to sway the outcome of your CMP exam. So this is one of the few situations where the examiner, not your evidence, right? The examiner's statements will take you to whatever percent you have. So pain upon manipulation and use of, okay, sure. Absolute trust fall into that one. Indication of swelling on use. This is going to be a subjective thing at times because you might not have swelling at the time of the actual CMP. So swelling on use they might be taking your word on it. And then we got characteristics of whatever this is. This is going to be another situation in which the rater takes the word of the examiner on it. So you can have at the severe level, you have it to where you have if you have 1 foot for unilateral or both feet, will determine what percentage you get. So you can have Pes Planus in both feet, but be service connected for 1 foot. So just keep that in mind that it's not an all or nothing thing. If the condition manifested, depending on how you get it rated, you can have it to where only 1 foot is service connected. So just keep that in mind. Now, moving up to the potential 50% condition. Once again, these have to be pronounced. The rater, I'm going to say we don't necessarily care about that in terms of like whatever they say. If they say it has marked pronation, extreme tenderness on the plantar surfaces, marked inward displacement, severe spasms of the tendons, we're going to take their word on all of this. So once again, if it comes down to we can only service connect 1 foot, 30%. We can service connect both feet, 50%. And this right here is going to be determined by whether or not how you claimed it. Number one, if you claimed for only 1 foot, then we're pretty much the examiner's only going to be reviewing that 1 foot. And if we're able to grant both feet, then both feet are granted. So now let's move on. And I apologize. My dogs are they're not feeling too well, so I keep having to take them out. Let's go to the actual DBQ. And let's increase the size of this so that way you guys can see it. So reviewing the DBQ. Now, like I said, you want to review the DBQ for your own personal review if you get granted to make sure that number one, it was granted correctly. And another reason is if you're doing private DBQs, you want to kind of maybe review to see how the examiner, what they gave you. So obviously you're going to fill this out, or this will be filled out. These records right here, the evidence should be, if you're doing a private DBQ, you want them to say what records they were given access to include the date ranges. Were they VA treatment records? Were they private records? What were they? The diagnosis section will matter because we need a diagnosis of Pes Planus or flat feet. It can be here. It also matters what unilateral or bilateral or which foot, however it goes. We do not care about ICD codes. Now, the date of diagnosis might matter for conditions or for theories like aggravation. So Pes Planus is very commonly an aggravation condition. So if the examiner disagrees with the date of diagnosis, that can cause us to have to defer back sometimes. Now, they technically can also put flat feet down here. It doesn't hurt anything. It just sometimes will confuse the rater. And then we've got a lot of these other foot conditions that don't necessarily apply. So this medical history, this is where you can have it to where the painful motion that I was talking about for the minimum 10% requirement. If you talk about having current painful motion, we can use that term up here to give you the 10% if for whatever reason you weren't going to meet the requirements. This should also be checked for the painful motion. Flare-ups don't really apply to the feet, so it doesn't for Pes Planus. So it doesn't necessarily influence anything. I mean, yeah. Functional loss is something that can be true. Typically, functional loss is not routinely associated with Pes Planus or flat feet, just because flattened arches don't cause you to not be able to use your foot. And then section 3 is the section that we're going to be talking about in this video. And it's literally just, do they have pain on use of the feet? Yes. So pain on use of the feet is going to come down here. Oops. So we have pain on use of feet. So this is one of the criteria for the 10%. And that's the way this is going to be. It's going to be mix and match the symptom. So 3A talks about the 10% evaluation criteria. 3B talks about 10%. So let's go. Yeah, no, let's keep going. Swelling. Okay, swelling is that's a 20 or 30% evaluation. So as you can see, they don't all line up. It's not like they go with weight bearing over the line of the toe, So you do have to search and kind of contrast these. And then you go to do they have characteristics of the calluses? Characteristics of the callus. So that's also a 20 or 30% thing. So when you review this, you will have to have both the DBQ and the 38 CFR Part 4 up, because it doesn't, like everything with the VA, the DBQ is made in a way that doesn't make sense for rating purposes. So this can also be a situation where sometimes the rater will miss some of the check boxes because it's spread out and done so in a very weird way. 3E is a question that can actually cause you to have 0%. So 3E is where the symptoms are relieved by the built up shoe or arch support. If this is marked yes, like release, yeah, this right here. If either one of these are marked for this side, then 0% is the maximum you can get, because it says that yes, you have these things, but symptoms are relieved from arch supports and built up shoes. So just keep that in mind for your private DBQs. If the examiner does this side, then 0% is the maximum you can get. However, if the examiner does this side for but remains symptomatic, then that's going to be this, the criteria for the 50 or 30%, depending. They have to be not improved by orthotic shoes or appliances. So that's what this question right here is talking about. I know it's convoluted and it's crazy. Does a veteran have extreme tenderness? Yes or no? This is really easy. So there's not a lot of diagnostic testing associated with this. This is just basically you go into the examiner and the examiner just touches your feet a lot in a weird, creepy way. And then they come out with whatever these are. And this is yes or no. Like there's no latitude for this. If the examiner says, whatever they say, whatever they mark in here is whatever we're going to transcribe into VBMSR. So, and it's as simple as just looking up to see, how many of these do I have? And you need all of them. So that's the way that this review works is if you don't have all of these, then, it's going to be this one potentially. So it can make it quite challenging. Now, and it's just all of these are yes or no. So one of the things that I suggest is always go to a podiatrist first and just kind of take this with you or write down these notes as to what these things are, what these are, and ask them, do I have this? So that way you know whether or not you're kind of barking up the right tree or not. If you have 30% for Pes Planus, acquired flat foot, and you're trying to get to 50, you need to go to the doctor and see if you have these things in order to determine whether or not you have a chance of getting 50%. The rater will not decide this at all. Like I can tell you right now, unless that rater was a podiatrist, they are not going to weigh in on this. This is a trust fall situation where they will trust the examiner explicitly because there's no way to combat this from an evidence standpoint. The only way that the rater can come back on the examiner is if they didn't fill out some of these things for this. Like if they left 3L and 3M blank, we would have questions because we're like, whoa, 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 you didn't complete the DBQ. It's insufficient. But that's about all I got for you today. I will let you know that this will be heavily edited. So it's going to sound like I'm having a stroke probably by the time that I'm done editing it because between my dog and my family and everything else, I've had to stop this video and restart my thought process. So I'm going to sound like a crazy person whenever I post this, but keep in mind that the general overview for this is this. Number one, let's circle back. The foot is hard to rate. So there's many opportunities for the rater to potentially get it wrong. There's a lot of caveats to what, Pes Planus can and cannot be assigned separate evaluations with, like plantar fasciitis and metatarsalgia. They cannot be separately granted. If you are a veteran who has Pes Planus and plantar fasciitis separately granted, that is a clear and unmistakable error. If you are a veteran with Pes Planus and metatarsalgia separately granted, that is also an error. Even in circumstances, and I had to edit this out because I said it wrong because it's easy to say wrong. But even in circumstances where you have a foot injury, where you can combine them together and rate them under this is not advantageous the majority of the time. And then we talked about how it is rated and the fact that this is such a specialty condition that you need to determine whether or not you meet the next higher criteria. You need a podiatrist to weigh in on that. Like that is not something you can eyeball and go, I think I've got marked pronation of the foot. Sure. I mean, it's going to be the examiner gets absolute say in this. And the examiner is not going to be potentially a podiatrist. This is not a specialist required exam. So you do not need a specialist. A podiatrist will not look at this. A nurse practitioner will, or a doctor or a PA or somebody. Like, yeah. So sometimes I recommend having the VA do your exams because you're more likely to get a doctor who might have a better understanding of what these terms are. Um, Especially if you get your care for your feet at the VA, I might put in a 4138 and recommend that you get your exams done through the VHA. But anyway, that's about all I got for you guys today on this. And I am sorry for how cut up it's going to be, but that's about all I got. Raider out.